Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 31st of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest and greatest in your weather community simply by going to weather.gov/Alaska or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube during the afternoon. You may have already seen your daily map briefing. If you simply go to NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks, you can get it there, or type in AKWX and you'll find that appear in your video listings there. Give us a call on the weather info line as well. That option is always available at 800-472-0391. And if you write down the numbers as you're calling there, it'll go a little bit faster for you next time. You don't have to listen to the prompts. So here we go. Fire danger is still with us, and in fact that threat has grown just a little bit more in the last couple days. Another round of rain will be working its way eastward in the next 2 to 3 days, so some of this may be eased, but fire danger is starting to crop back up in some of these communities there in the interior, along the Yukon Valley and up into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, as well as the northern slopes of the Alaska Range. In the meantime, our blocking pattern in the upper atmosphere is still upon us. We can easily track the motion of that high pressure ridge across the Bering, and what it's doing all the way around that circle there, or that track, is it's taking Pacific moisture and spreading that out across the Kamchatka Peninsula, eastern parts of Siberia, and then allowing that to drop down across the YK. Also interesting to note here, just east of Taipei, you can see another area of tropical moisture gathering there. That is of no consequence to Alaska, at least in the near term, but signs that the tropics, of course, are active, even though we're not getting a taste of that just yet. As we get into the late fall, of course, that becomes a much more likely option for storm pattern development and enhancement as we look out into the tropics again toward September and October, of course. So we'll be watching that, but not really a major concern for us yet. As we look at Alaska with a visible satellite picture, you can see a giant swirl here across the Gulf. That is low pressure, and it's a very ragged appearance. There are a lot of dry airs being brought into that system, and it's just kind of hovering, lurking out here in the Gulf, blocked off by our high pressure ridge out across the Bering Sea. Watch as that moisture goes in from the north and then dries up the further south it goes. So we've had a wealth of sunshine today across the interior and southwestern Alaska, and many areas across southeast are seeing ample sunshine today. So beautiful weather in many parts of Alaska, and even in St. Paul. Get this, St. Paul's weather today saw temperatures hitting 63 degrees, which was a tie for the record high today. And if you think that's still pretty warm for St. Paul, on top of it being a record-setting temperature there, you'd be right. It's 3 degrees off of the all-time record high of 66. So some toasty stuff going on out there in the middle of the Bering. A high-pressure system is to blame there, keeping a little bit of dry air and at times clear weather across some areas of the Pribilofs. In fact, St. George, I believe, at the same hour made it up to 68. 1,027 millibar high sitting right on top of the Pribilofs today, with several waves of low pressure coming over the top and moving east of that. You can see that sparked a few showers across the west coast from Kotzebue Sound all the way down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta across southeast. High pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf now at 1,027 millibars has also improved the weather situation there, so dry days continue, at least for now. Out across the west, a new frontal boundary working in across the western and central chain is already dying. Its last gasps of air seen probably tonight and tomorrow. That's wringing out some light rain as it moves eastward through the central chain, probably passing Kiska tonight with a little bit more cloud cover than rainfall. And if you look up north, that is another cold front coming out of the Chukchi Sea. With that, we expect a stronger wind shift, probably not a whole lot of gusty winds, but certainly enough to stir up more rainfall across the Arctic coast, all the way into Kotzebue Sound with some steadier rainfall. Same goes for Nome and the lower and middle Yukon valleys. Low pressure sitting just east of Arctic Village at 1,011 millibars will drag a trough of low pressure across Bristol Bay, and out ahead of that, things will stay fairly mild. We'll keep a southerly wind going through the Cook Inlet for the next day or so. With that, we keep conditions fairly dry and mild across southeast, south central, and Copper River Basin, while most of the activities continuing across the north and western part of the state. As we get into Friday, the front moves onshore up to about the Brooks Range or so, and we're going to see a wind shift, more of a northwesterly flow with this. South, we have showers, all rain, steadier rainfall as you get into the YK, also into the interior, south of the Yukon, probably the upper Kuskokwim Valley, and areas in the middle and eastern Tanana Valley. Out across southeast, things are still dry. High pressure sitting outside of Prince William Sound. It looks like a great start if you've got an early weekend to head out into the Sound or perhaps Resurrection Bay or even into the north and western Gulf. Things are going to be pretty quiet and seas will be relatively flat. Not perfect, but pretty flat considering that usually there's at least a little bit of chop out there. Out across the Bering, 1,027 millibars, and you'll notice showers and some fog, mainly north and west of Nunivak Island. Not much of a change there. Some of those clouds will break up a little bit further to the west, and you're back in the muck as you get into Kiska and Attu with periods of rainfall there. Looking into the first part of the weekend, a frontal boundary now drops south to about the Brooks Range summits and doesn't really go a whole lot further southward, but along and south of that line, you'll likely see a better chance for some showers around the ridge tops and southward, all the way up to about the Alaska Range and maybe just bleeding over into the Susitna Valley. And with that, with the temperatures still being fairly mild and with heating and the southerly flow feeding into that, there could be an opportunity for some isolated showers and storms in that region there. Now, there's a much better chance we'll just see some convective weather and some showers, maybe not a whole lot of lightning activity, but keep your eye open for that possibility, at least as we head into the weekend. Out around Nunivak Island, north and all the way around the periphery of that high pressure system, there's a chance for some light rain and showers. And southeast still looking dry into Saturday. How about that? South central along the Kenai Peninsula, things look pretty good. Bristol Bay, you're looking dry. And along the Alaska Peninsula from Sandpoint, Cold Bay, Falls Pass, Port Heiden, there's probably a chance of at least a few passing showers as one of these spokes of low pressure passes over your region. Don't be surprised to see that get stirred up just a little bit more, but it should be passing. That's the good news there. Here's a look at the temperatures today. My, oh my, low to mid 60s for a good part of southeast. As you get out toward Klawock, Craig, temperatures were in the upper 60s, 70 in Haydn, 58 around Haida Gwaii. Sitka was 64 degrees, Juneau 66, a very mild day in southeast Yakutat, lower 60s today. Prince William Sound saw temperatures in the upper 50s and lower 60s this afternoon. Homer and Seward both in the mid 60s. Kenai was 60, a lovely 63 around Anchorage at 3 o'clock. Around Palmer and Wasilla also mild as you get up the road toward Talkeetna and Squentin. Temps there were in the lower to mid 60s. 73-degree temperature there around the Tanana Valley, 67 in Fairbanks and Eagle, 71 in Northway today, 61 there in Kodiak. So pretty mild all the way around the southern parts of the region. As you get up northward, the heat continued there in Fort Yukon, Yukon Flats, 64 degrees there, 61 in Arctic Village, 66 around Anaktuvuk Pass, Ambler and Bettles both in the 50s and 60s. The Arctic coast, Barrow got pretty close to 50 degrees today, 54 in Atkasuk. As you moved a little bit further inland, it was easier to get things warmed up away from the water, of course. 42 in Kaktovik, Kotzebue Sound. Temperatures were in the lower to mid 50s, 52 in Shishmaref, 53 in Kivalina, and low 50s there for Nome with Unalakleet at 55. Grayling was 55, McGrath just shy of 70, probably went there by 4 and 5 o'clock. 55 for Bethel, Nunivak Island showing 57. And there's the Pribilofs once again. How many days of the year do you think temperatures actually make it into the 60s? It's pretty rare stuff with average temperatures generally in the 40s and low 50s. 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. You can see Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and Falls Pass. All pretty mild stuff today. Falls Pass, I believe, made it almost to that 70-degree mark, if not surpassing it in the last couple hours. And lower 50s there for the central and western chain. Everybody just about enjoying some very mild weather. Low temperatures tonight for southeast, likely in the upper 40s to lower 50s, including Sitka at 47, Juneau at 48, 46 in Yakutat. Prince William Sound temperatures in the upper 40s to low 50s. Kenai Peninsula generally low 50s, 51 in Kodiak, 53 around Fairbanks, 55 for Fort Yukon, the Arctic coast. In the lower 40s, including Wainwright at 41, Barrow at 40. Around Kotzebue Sound, anywhere from 48 around Point Hope and Point Lay to the lower 50s for Shishmaref, Kivalina, Kotzebue, 48 in Nome, 49 for Savunga and St. Lawrence Island. Around the Kuskokwim Delta, look for temperatures there in the mid-50s, so pretty mild stuff there all the way back into Bristol Bay, 53 for King Salmon, 53 in Bethel, the Alaska Peninsula also in the lower 50s, about the same there for the chain. And St. Paul probably dropping to 52, back up to 53 tomorrow. It would be unusual to see another really warm day like today, but it could be possible with high pressure not moving very much at all. So just watch out for another hot day there if things set up the same. Upper 60s to lower 70s across southeast. Prince William Sound back in the mid-50s there, 62 in Kodiak. Low 60s around Fairbanks for your Friday there, and a nice start for the Arctic coast with highs in the lower 40s around Barrow to 56 around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Shishmaref closer to 60 degrees tomorrow, 61 in Nome. Norton Sound temperatures in the upper 50s. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta probably closing in on 60 degrees for many places and a little bit closer to 70 again around Bristol Bay. 62 in Kodiak sounds like a great temperature. Here's a look at flying weather then. IFR conditions are expected across the Arctic coast. Most areas there along the coast itself will see IFR as that frontal boundary moves in, and then MVFR for more places along the coastal plain. Anywhere south of the Yukon Valley to the Alaska Range, probably dealing with at least MVFR tomorrow. There may be some patchy IFR as you get into the mountains themselves and along the Yukon Delta region all the way into the probably beginning of the middle Yukon Valley. Anywhere from Port Hayden southward toward the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, IFR conditions are expected there and also across the western and central chain. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are expected to be MVFR for your Friday there as visibilities drop. We may see some changes take place during the day in Lake Clark. Merrill Pass will probably start the day at marginal restrictions. Rainy Pass likely leans over toward IFR conditions as the day goes on. Same goes for Windy Pass tomorrow as more clouds set in there and precipitation becomes possible. Isabel Pass will start out clear, but then see some lowered visibility as we go throughout the day. Mentasta Pass probably visual flight rule through most of your Friday, and same goes for Tanita Pass as we get into the afternoon. Porter's Pass will call visual for most of the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass both expected to be VFR. As you would guess, with the blocking pattern that we have in the upper atmosphere, that big high-pressure system that's just not moving, we have a wealth of warm air spreading all the way through the Bering. Those freezing levels as high as 12,000 feet. We have seen them as high as 14,000 feet earlier in the week, so it is diminished somewhat. We've got our pocket of cool air here surrounding our low-pressure system in the Gulf, and then much cooler air is sliding its way into the northwestern territories across Canada. So we're not getting the full brunt of the cold on either side of that high-pressure system, and conditions have cooled off just a little bit in the Bering. Icing potential, you have to go way up there, anywhere from above 6,000 feet to above 11,000 feet in the west, and below 13 to below 16,000 feet in the west. So you've got a little bit of a range here, but this seems to be the best corridor for some light icing potential, generally rime as we go throughout the afternoon tomorrow. Our upper level weather pattern shows that blocking pattern, that omega block, making that Greek letter shaped omega across the Bering Sea, and the low pressure system lurking in the Gulf there, supported at the surface by the upper level low you see here. And high pressure across the western U.S. continues the drought problems there and keeps the moisture trying to get closer to south and east. But again, we've seen surface high pressure ridge taking care of that in short order. So things remain nice in southeast, and low pressure across the Arctic Ocean is guiding in that next wave of colder air that we're talking about moving in for Friday and into Saturday. So all this stays in place. That means there's probably more to come until it moves. 9,000 feet, we have a light westerly flow going across the interior, about 10 to 15 knots or so. Low pressure just north of Barrow, though, is guiding in a much faster ribbon of moving air. They're around 50 knots or so. So this is a pretty isolated little speed max, we like to call this here at 9,000 feet, just zipping right along. Again, that's all part and parcel with that colder air that's zipping in at the surface. High pressure sitting west of St. Matthew, anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots, guiding that flow around in a clockwise fashion. Low pressure working against that in the Gulf with wind speeds about 15 to 20 knots or so, and light winds coming up the southeastern coast only at 10 knots. At 3,000 feet, there's our fast-moving winds again across the Arctic coast, as high as 40 knots now from the north and west. It slows down significantly as you move over the Brooks Range, so any speed issues there for turbulence or wind shear should be pretty contained to the coastline itself. High pressure across the Bering, around 10 to 15 knots, will guide those winds from Nome all the way down toward Bethel and Bristol Bay, about 15 knots from the north and west. And you can see more of a southerly flow way out west of Shemya, with north and easterly winds running down through Shelikof Strait in the Alaska Peninsula, about 20 knots or so. Wind speeds through southeast continue to be pretty light there, only 10 to 15 knots, so smooth sailing tomorrow. Turbulence, well, with the speeds that we saw up north, you would expect at least some chop. It probably wouldn't be too far out of left field to say there's going to be some isolated moderate along the coastline tomorrow, but keep watch for that. Generally, that's going to be below about 4,000 feet there. Around the Alaska Range and just north, probably below 10,000 feet, you'll probably pick up some chop there. And along the YK Delta, below about 4,000 feet. Same goes for the western sections of the chain. Now for southeast, we have VFR. We have pretty sunny conditions there for most places and no turbulence or icing potential. Looks like a great day to fly in southeast, so be careful and have a great day out there no matter what part of Alaska you're flying in, and enjoy your Friday. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at the latest sea ice edge and, of course, your marine weather forecast to take you into the weekend. Stay tuned.
Supermoon? Not so much. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory. Don't look now, but we've got another supermoon coming on August 10th.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plow Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Don't let the
Supermoon
get to you because it's not really that big a deal.
Oh, come on, James. All the TV news people go nuts about the supermoon. So it must be something really special, right?
Dean, you know as well as I do that even though there's a measurable size difference between the biggest and the smallest full moon of the year, that you can't really notice it without special measuring devices.
Hey, I have an idea. Let's tell everybody about one of the simplest, most handy measuring devices around.
Okay, everyone already has one right at hand, but we need a really catchy term for it. Let's combine our names and call it the Reg Albury Lunicizer.
Nah, I think I prefer the Algas Moonometer.
Ugh, maybe not. After all, we're talking about using your pinky finger to see how big the supermoon is. Not.
The moon is the easiest thing to see in the night sky, but remember when you're looking at the moon, you're seeing reflected sunlight. The moon does not produce light of its own.
And the moon is not always a stargazer's friend because it can get to be so bright it wipes out most of the stars and the Milky Way.
Let's start watching the moon on the evening of August 4th and see what we can see.
And use your pinky finger to measure the apparent size of the moon. Extend your arm, stick out your pinky finger, close one eye, and then put your pinky finger over the moon. It will disappear behind your finger.
The moon will be 1 day past first quarter, so it's what we call a waxing gibbous moon. Remember, gibbous means humped, and waxing means it'll get bigger night after night.
To the moon's left is the biggest and brightest constellation of summer, Scorpius the Scorpion. These three stars mark the head of the Scorpion and follow this curving line of stars down and around to the pair of stars that mark the stinger at the end of the tail.
The next night, a slightly fatter moon will be above bright red Antares, which marks the heart of the Scorpion.
Remember to use your pinky finger to measure the moon.
Antares is one of the largest stars known, and if it were placed where our sun is, it would extend out beyond Mars. And Antares produces over 60,000 times as much energy as our sun. Whew!
The next two nights, the 6th and 7th, an even fatter moon will be above the stars of Sagittarius, the centaur that follows the Scorpion across the sky. But with the extra light the moon is reflecting, you'll do well to spot the teapot stars that make up just part of Sagittarius.
The next two nights, the 8th and the 9th, the moon will continue to get fatter.
Try your finger trick. See what happens.
The moon is now in the constellation of Capricornus.
Just barely.
And though it's not quite full now, it will probably look full to most people, but it won't really be full until 2:09 p.m. Eastern Time on the 10th. We won't get to see the moon until it rises several hours later.
So if you really want to be picky about it, the moon is past full when it rises for us in North America.
So, what makes this full moon a supposed supermoon?
Supermoon is not really an astronomical term, but refers to a moon that is full at about the same time it's especially close to the Earth.
The moon's orbit is not a perfect circle, but is really an ellipse. This means the moon gets closer to the Earth,
Perigee,
once every orbit, and farthest from the Earth,
apogee.
once every orbit. In fact, this year the moon had 2 perigees in January.
And it will have 2 more in November.
But this perigee on August 10th is only 9 minutes away from the time the moon is full. So it gives us the closest
and thus biggest full moon of 2014.
So look at the rising moon on the evening of August 10th.
And use your pinky finger to measure it. Can you tell it's a
Supermoon?
Keep looking up.
Well, being the end of July, it is getting maybe a little bit easier to do some stargazing around Alaska, but we won't talk about that anymore, not for a while, or the fireweed's done blooming. Here's a look at the sea ice edge up across the north, and you can tell we're rapidly approaching that sea ice minimum. That also kind of signals the end of summer in some cases. As you look up around the eastern Beaufort Sea, you can see considerably more open water here. There's still some pockets of ice in that, but the general thicker ice is up across areas east of Barrow all the way to just north of Prudhoe Bay and west of Kaktovik. None of this, of course, shorefast, as you'll recall. And then west of Barrow to Wainwright and Point Lake, we've got a lot of melting going on, so the general motion of the ice is moving from east to west and then kind of crunching up here just northeast of Barrow. And we have reductions in the ice thanks to temperature change there from Wainwright to Point Lake, and a little tiny little patch of ice is floating out here. It's kind of rotting there on the shoals. So improvements there if you're looking to get from Kivalina all the way around to Barrow, maybe out toward Kaktovik. Getting there. You can check this anytime you want by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Looking at southeast now. Let's try this again. North and westerly winds, thanks to high pressure sitting to the west, moving down the coast. Very light winds, about 10 to 15 knots or so. Seas running around 3 feet along the coastal sections, the inner waterways, anywhere from 2 to about 4 feet as you head from the central to southern parts around Ketchikan and Metlakatla. Now, in the Lynn Canal, the winds will pick up a little bit more as we go through the day. In the northern Lynn Canal, it could be as strong as 25 knots from the south, with about 2 to 5 foot seas there. As we get into Saturday, that should diminish just a little bit, but not much. We'll hold on to some of those stronger southerlies, but elsewhere we turn the winds to more of a west to easterly direction. 15 knots there with 3 to 4 foot seas in just about all areas. One exception would be Clarence Strait out of the north and west, 20 knots with a 4 foot sea on Saturday. Across south central, pretty light winds and flat seas considering time of year. High pressures in charge around Prince William Sound and outside of Prince William Sound all the way around to Seward and almost into the Barrens, but things pick up a little bit faster there. Up around the northern Gulf and inside the Sound, 10 knots, a variable flow with 2 to 4 foot seas. Northeasterlies coming down the east side of Kodiak Island. Easterlies making it over the Barrens and turning a little bit up into the Cook Inlet with 15 to 20 knot winds. You should expect 4 to 5 foot seas from Kachemak Bay all the way up toward Anchorage there, and easterlies coming in across Shelikof Strait at 15 knots with a 3 foot sea. As we get into Saturday, very little change, 10 to 15 knot winds across the north and western Gulf. Easterlies still coming into Kodiak, northeasterlies still running down Shelikof Strait, but the winds reduce and diminish just a little bit inside of Cook Inlet, and west of the Barrens we're dropping down to about 10 knots with a variable flow and 3 foot seas, 4 foot seas from Homer northward toward Anchorage, so a little bit better conditions on Saturday. Across the Alaska Peninsula, light and variable winds north of the peninsula in the Bering, and southwesterlies with a 1 foot sea, almost flat there in Bristol Bay, 10 knot winds, and a little bit faster flow around Castle Cape. And southward, as you get south of Sand Point and King Cove, the winds diminish even more to a northerly flow at 10 knots with a 5 foot sea. On Saturday, we'll keep that northeasterly flow, 15 to 20 knots on the Pacific side, 5 to 6 foot seas there. 1 foot seas nearly flat there from Bristol Bay to north of Cold Bay, all thanks to that high pressure system sitting out around the Pribilof. So very nice conditions there in the Bering inside Bristol Bay on Saturday. On Friday in the chain, light and variable flow north of Unalaska as you get out toward Nikolsky and west. The winds start to pick up from the east and southeast, 15 to 20 knots or so, with 7 to 8 foot seas from Atka, Adak, all the way out toward Kiska, and 4 to 5 foot seas on the Pacific side, 15 to 20 knots there. More of a variable flow, though, south of Unalaska, Nikolsky. That becomes northwesterly as we get into Saturday. A variable flow south of Nikolsky to Adak, and more of a southeasterly flow as you head in from the Pacific side, becoming southerly from Kiska to Attu, about 15 knots with a 4 foot sea. Otherwise, northwesterly winds are pretty much the rule to the east. On Friday in the west coast, an onshore flow, 20 to 25 knots there, with that westerly wind bringing seas up to 4 feet. Westerly flow into the Kuskokwim Delta at 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, and variable flow still light and probably still warm around St. Paul and St. George. As we get into Saturday, well, the warm is over there with the northwesterly flow. Look for Nunivak Island, St. Matthew Island waters up to 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, 4 foot seas north of Nunivak Island. As you get into St. Lawrence Island, more of a 4 foot sea there coming into places like Amanak and the Kuskokwim Delta at 10 knots with a 2 foot sea on Saturday. Across the Arctic coast, we're going to see some changes here with that northwesterly wind coming on shore from Barrow down toward Cape Lisburn, and 15 to 20 knots there with a 3 to 4 foot sea. Very light winds inside and outside of Kotzebue Sound with a 2 foot sea, and winds come up north of Prudhoe Bay to Dead Horse, 10 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas there out toward Kaktovik. As we get into Saturday, we'll keep those stronger westerly winds, 20 to 25 knots there, so be prepared for the winds to come up through the first part of the weekend. Northwesterlies from Barrow to Point Lay with a 2 foot sea all the way down the Chukchi Seacoast into Kotzebue Sound. So much improved conditions to the west and a much more windy condition across the Beaufort Seacoast out toward Barrow. Here's a recap of tonight's weather, and the reason the wind is coming up is a cold front coming in from the Chukchi Seacoast and working its way into the coastal plain as we go through the weekend. With that, showers, rain generally more likely there across the northwest and the west coast going from tonight into the next several days. Southeast, you're high and dry. You look like you have a great weekend set up, certainly a great Friday there, and probably a good Saturday and Sunday as well, with high pressure parked just offshore and across the northern Gulf Coast. This is a great setup for you to have fine weather. In the meantime, across the Yukon Valley, periods of showers. Eventually some rain is expected as we get into Friday. Might even be an isolated thunderclap or two, but probably the more active weather will be across the interior and the north as we head through the next several days, as colder air drops into the coastal plain and sparks a better chance of showers across the interior going into Saturday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.